We're going to talk about sit spot and what that is, what the practice looks like, how you can be, develop how you can develop your own sit spot, and also what you can learn and why would you even bother doing it. So I guess I can start. So my experience with a sit spot started really when I started to commit and dedicate myself to deepening my connection with the natural world. And my mentors, all of them over the years, in their own ways, have taught sit spot to me and how to continue develop more precision of what I'm seeing when I'm out there. So big picture of what a sit spot is. I mean, if what are we calling it? Sit spot. So it is a spot that you sit at. And yes, that sounds super, super simple, but to add detail to that, it is the same spot that you sit in. And when you go there, you sit there for long periods of time so that you can let the forest go back to baseline after walking to your spot. And also when you're going to that spot, you're not just going to that spot for a week, you're going to that spot throughout the entire year, maybe years after years, and you're also in that spot all different types of weather, again, seasons, time of day. Maybe you're sleeping at your sit spot, maybe you do a vision quest at your sit spot. There's so many possibilities to spend time there. And what happens is when you go, there's different levels of teaching that you can get when you go to the same spot and stay there, or in a landscape for the same spot over a period of time, versus always being exposed to new environments, new ecosystems, maybe new countries or anything like that. So we're really focusing and honing in our skills of observing patterns.
For me, I think sit spots became a thing I would do on my lunch hour at a few of my jobs. So, making time for something like that wasn't always feasible in my off time, or I was out doing other things. So, there's many times where I've found local green spaces and find a spot. Uh, you know, Actually, it's been pretty much for me always by a small river. I don't know if that's just what I've been drawn to, but so in the past, I find a spot near a river. It's kind of secluded. It's not always a quiet spot. Sometimes it's by a mall or some type of industrial setting or whatever. So there's still buzzing and horns and all types of different noises. But I found by being near the water with that white noise and then just witnessing that spot for just a small period of time, usually max a half an hour is what I, kind of was allotted with in that situation. But to go back to that spot over and over and over to be able to just unwind life's stressors, see what nature does in the different seasons, the different birds, the wildlife that come through. Um, it's been a good way to kind of uh, get out of my body and into my mind. Um, yeah.
And I think so if you're just listening so far in the video and you're like, oh, where can my sit spot be? Oftentimes people think, oh, it has to be in this really wild, beautiful place, by a river, or, for me, it was one of my favorite sit spots is right by a pond. And then when we lived on the land for an extended period of time, we often said like our whole property was our sit spot. And yes, we weren't actually really sitting all the time in that case, but we were observing our land every single day in that same framework. But I would say that was also after we had both developed the skills of a sit spot to then be able to expand it to larger settings. And I think so wherever you are in your journey, if it's just the beginning, start with a smaller area and then build up. It could be your window of a room. It could be a porch or the front of your house. It does not have to be a wild spot. I know a lot of people have two sit spots. So one is very close to their home, super accessible, so they can go there every day. Some people like to bring their coffee, their tea to their sit spot and have just this space where they're essentially developing awareness and just paying attention outwards. Other people don't mind walking to a spot. It all depends where you live and what you have access to. Maybe you live already in nature and you can find just a really cute spot that you're drawn to that, yeah, is gorgeous and that you can really spend lots of time there. So everyone will have their own, options for their sit spot, but just don't let that become a barrier of entry. Um, with sit spot, everybody will have different ways of building and deepening that relationship. So some people, it's just going and then going home and just having consistency. For other people, they like to journal, write down their observations, write down the birds. People in the past, I have mapped my sit spot over the weeks and added observations to a map rather than writing words. I used to draw plants, especially when I was in different landscapes that I didn't know. So you can also have sit spots while you travel. I used to draw plants that I didn't know and would just write features, even if I, at the time didn't know the name of that plant or what that plant was. But I definitely, if you're more of a, drawing person, some people just like to journal their emotions at their sit spot. Some people like to craft. What else? Like, you can really do anything at your sit
Meditate,
spot.
just observe. One of my sit spots, like Gary mentioned, was right by a shopping mall and right by a car dealership I was working at. And so there you could hear pages and paging for people in the background. You could hear stuff from the grocery store, cars, traffic. But it was by a small river, and I observed there was lots of shopping carts. So one day we got a bunch of the boys from the dealership. We pulled shopping carts out of the river, and like, we rescued however many shopping carts from this river, and my little pat on the back and eco warrior kind of helping out. That, I guess that's all it brought for me, was just a way to get out of my mind at work, get a little green space, nature, see some little animals, and then get some garbage out of this river. So that was, became of one of my sit spots.
And I think in my experience, when you stay in a spot for longer periods of time, you start to see more details. So I remember first learning bird language, and I could literally not perceive the different voices of the birds. And I could not understand by direct experience that birds could have different personalities. I really observed that in a sit spot because you're seeing the same bird all the time for a long period of time. So there's pieces like that you could learn about bird language, but you need to experience it yourself to actually understand. Even with tracking, I remember at the beginning of my journey, someone said, how does a squirrel move? Is it hopping? Is it, doing more of a like walking gait? And I remember being asked that question and being a little like shocked that it didn't come so naturally and that I questioned myself. And to me, that was kind of sad, and which is what kind of fueled a lot of this journey. But I think when you watch a squirrel for 30 minutes, you're really going to know how that squirrel moves, versus oftentimes people just be like, oh, hey, look, there's a squirrel, and even sometimes now I meet people who don't even know the difference between a squirrel and a chipmunk, and to them that's like the same. And all of those details really come to fruition if you really want to cultivate your skills. You have to be able to stay in that pattern observation so you can pick up on nuances.
Yeah, so one of my sit spots I held for a few months was during a difficult time in my life, between jobs and home stress and physical injuries. Doing the workout piece was too difficult for me, so um, I was doing what a teacher of mine, Paul Check, calls working in. So obviously the opposite of working out is working in. So finding a sit spot by a river was a place I could go and just breathe and work through my emotions, my disappointments, all these things that were coming up in this turbulent time in my life, and try to kind of work through those mentally and kind of push off the stress of my life and just push it away and try to process through that. And in that, I wasn't always just sitting there with my eyes closed, in a beautiful pose, but it was kind of just sitting there breathing, like, oh my gosh, like, thinking, and then sometimes you're like, oh look, there's a bird, and just watch that bird for 5 minutes, and oh wow, like I didn't know they did that. Or one time I came to the sit spot and there was a snake, and like I'm not the biggest fan of snakes, but I respected it and respected me, and I just watched it. Like, what are you doing? Like, kind of where are you going, and what are you up to today? What are snakes doing? And I'm not walking around, and little things like that. Like, whoa, what's this bug doing? Like, I know this bug, but I've never really watched it for 20 minutes. I'll just see what he does for his day. And just kind of tuning out was a big thing for me. I guess you could say tuning in, but either or, just having that spot to go to and work through my mental difficulties and emotional problems, and just push away all the stress of my work, my home life, and all these different things, and just go to a spot that was kind of like as soon as I entered through the portal there, like everything else just kind of would go away, and I could focus on whatever I was there to focus on.
And I think another piece that's important, and again, this will be person to person dependent, but in the past, I've had teachers who really encouraged for you to have someone to share your sit spot stories with. Whether, you know, it's an emotional thing that comes up or a nature observation or questions you have. So what I love about bringing people outside and running programs is that everybody sees different things in a forest. It's so amazing what people are drawn to, their natural gifts, their natural senses that are, you know, more dominant than other people in a group. We definitely know our senses and our strengths and just our ability to perceive and be aware in a forest. And so you get to learn that about yourself in your sit spot, because nobody's telling you, you know, what to experience or what to pick up. And there's obviously an unlimited amount of things that you can perceive and be aware of, but your soul, your body is picking up on certain things. So having someone to share those stories, if you don't want to speak to a person, journaling is great, or writing, or some form of, you know, putting it down as an observation. But oftentimes people love sharing and talking with friends, and so having someone who is willing to catch stories, and it's great if they also want to develop this practice in their life, and you can catch their stories as well. So you can learn so much from each other from having sit spots, especially, you know, when it comes to seeing plants or different animal behavior. You can learn and feed and grow together. It's oftentimes going to be more sustainable to have a long-term practice than if you're just doing it on your own.
What would you say are some of the benefits to having a sit spot?
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on a lot of them, but the main thing is expanding your awareness, becoming quiet in your mind and in your body so that you can perceive more. I would say it's, you know, cultivating more detail in what you can pick up on a landscape. You're really tuning into nuances that not a lot of people can even perceive. You're understanding seasonality, you're understanding, you know, I could go on forever, but like you're really truly understanding ecosystem dynamics because you're able to be in one spot and see those changes happening versus always changing where you are, where there's a ton of changes happening. It's too much for the mind to actually take in.
I would say,
and it's really special to feel super connected to one place.
definitely, yeah. I'd say a notable thing with a sit spot is that's where a lot of our most notable scientific discoveries and our greatest philosophers, that's where many of these people come up with their ideas or their beautiful ways of thinking, and they go to these sit spots, and then they come up with these revelations or these ideas pop into their head, and you know, like they're working on some type of scientific problem, and they're out in their sit spot in the forest, or they're at their cottage, or they're, you know, on their back porch, and then they have this, you know, this download comes in. So I guess it's opening up a place for God, for a lack of a better term, or you want to call it the universe, or, you know, the great beyond, for something to come into you. You're kind of opening yourself up for something greater to use you as a conduit to bring something to this earth. And I think that's a big a big reason some people should get to a sit spot, because of how many great minds have brought something back from a quiet area that they've been, and then they're able to integrate that into their life and change humanity.
Yeah, and I think it's irreplaceable. Like the spots that you've spent so much time versus me. If Jeff came to my spots, it would just not be the same. Like, yeah, he might think it's beautiful or special, but some of my sit spots aren't even that special places. And kids go to this naturally. They often, have their favorite trees or their favorite nooks in the forest. And, call that a sit spot or not, they're spending a lot of time doing the same things that we just talked about in those special spots. So there is just like true gratitude and richness in your depth of connection and sacredness to a place that you can't have if you're just going for a weekend hike at different national parks every single month or something. I don't know. It's really it's like building a long-term relationship with a person versus having 1,000 friends that you don't really know that well versus a few that you really get to go deep in their relationship. So there's a different level of beauty that comes with investing so much time and energy to a place and to a natural habitat that you get to care for, and that also gives back to you so much.
And I think investment's probably the perfect word for it too, because we tell this to a lot of our students, is once you're invested into a place, especially a wild place, even if it's that little river where I rescued the shopping carts, I was invested in that place. Maybe I didn't save it from development. The mall was already there, but to get those shopping carts out of there, and I hope one day some kids go walk the small little trail I did, and they get to see a nice clear river without shopping carts and tires and stuff that we pulled out. So by being invested in a wild place, it puts I don't want to say price tag on it, but it puts a value on it. So when what we tell to our students is, when someone comes to turn it into another Walmart or a parking lot, there's a bunch of people there to defend the place that can't speak for itself. And they say the same thing with hunting and animals. However you feel about it, there's all these hunters and people to defend the land and defend the animals that can't speak for themselves, because they're there to look after and protect them so that they'll be there in the future. And if everyone had a sit spot and a sacred spot and more people were out there, there'd be more people to get out there and defend that spot when the time comes.
So hopefully this video sparked some new questions, whether you have a sit spot or not. How can you deepen your connection to not only your landscape, but where you're at in a very special spot? And yeah, let us know if you have any questions or any comments on your sit spots, and
get out there and sit.
Yeah.